Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to create a shape and material transition in Houdini and Redshift with a little bit of chops as well, so let's dive in. So here we are into Houdini. Let's start by adding our first geometry node. So let's add a geometry node here. You can rename it as you want, and here you can dive inside and we will create our first object of the scene, which is a vase. So to do that, we'll use a curve. So let's add a curve here, and I will use a polygon curve. Into the viewport, I will click on space 3 to go into the front view, and here with the curve, I will select this icon and this icon to enable the snap on the grid here. And here I will define a profile for my vase. So to do that, I will create a first point into the center of the viewport. And here I will create a profile, but here you can go with your own profile. It's not necessary to go with absolutely the same as mine. Then when it's done, I will click on escape and I will click on space 1 to go back into the 3D view. And now we have this profile for our first object. So now we can see we have this profile and we can enable the point view with these icons. And now I will add a resample node. So let's add resamples. And here with the resamples, I will enable the maximum segment here and disable that one. And in my case, I will put the segment number at 25. I will also change this option and I will put subdivision curve. So now we can see we have these good profiles. And now we will use the revolve nodes. And with the revolve, we can create this type of geometry. And in my case, I will increase the division here to 30. So here we can see the normals are inverted. So I will use the reverse node. And here I will use the fuse node to fuse the points. So now we have this geometry and we wanna delete the top part of the geometry here. So to do that, we can go with this icon and we can select the primitive and we can select the brush selection with visibles only. So in that case, we can avoid selecting the face at the bottom of the geometry here. And we can select this one and maybe this one also. And here we can click on delete on the keyboard and we can see it will add a blast node to delete this top part of the geometry. Then we can subdivide our geometry maybe one time for now, because later we will subdivide it a bit more. So let's keep the depth at 1 for now. And then let's add an attribute wrangles. And with the attribute wrangles here, we will create an ID attribute. So let's type e at ID, which is equal to our point number. So let's type e at sptinum. And we will use this ID attribute just later. So now let's add a normal to our geometry. Now let's create a group with the bottom point of our geometry. So to do that, let's start by adding a sort node to sort our points on the y-axis. So with the sort node, we have the option of the point sort here, and let's select the by y. So in that case, the point is sort with the y-axis. And now let's create a group by range. And with the group by range here, you can go with the point group and you can rename it something like start points. And here you can select the start point and you can click on invert range. And now we can see we have a group with 1 point, which is the bottom point of our geometry. So now let's add another sort node. So with this sort node, this time we will sort the point with the ID attribute we have created with the attribute wrangles here. You have the possibility to change the point sort here with an attribute. So let's select by attribute. And here our attribute is our attribute ID. So we have created here with the attribute wrangles. And now we can start by creating our material transition. So basically with Houdini, you can create a material transition very easily. You just need an attribute going from 0 to 1 over your geometry. So you can use the pyro source spread to create that attribute, for example. You can also use the mops shape fall off. And here you can define a shape to travel your geometry. So you have linear fall off, spherical, box, and so on. You can also create a geometry moving around this one and transfer the color if you want. You can also use the mops spread fall off. You can also use the mask from geometry, and later you can use that mask attribute to create just that material transitions. So you have lots of possibility. You have to choose the one you prefer. So in my case, I love to use mob spread fall off. I found it very easy to use, and it can provide very good results. So for this tutorial, I will use the mob spread fall off, but you can use any of the nodes I present you just before. So you just need an attribute moving from 0 to 1. So here, let's plug the sort into the first input of the mob spread fall off. And here with the mob spread fall off, you can click on preview fall off here, and you can define a point group for the starting of the spread. And the group is created with a group range here, and we have called it start PTS. So let's select it, start points. And now we can preview our fall off, but for now we don't have anything. So let's change the timeline length to 144, and here you can go into animate, and here you can see you have the spread option here, and you can put some keyframe into the spread to moving our attribute from 0 to 1. So here let's start by creating a first keyframe here, let's put it at something like 0.3, let's add a keyframe with Alt and left click, let's go into the frame 120, and let's put the value at something like 1.25, maybe 25, maybe 1.3 here. So let's add a keyframe, let's increase the fall off width here. So you can see for now we have this type of fall off. You can decrease it or increase it. So in that case, it will create a more smooth transition between the two materials. And if you put it like this, it will create a more sharp transition between the two materials. So you have to choose the fall off width you want. So in my case, I will put at something like 0.4. So in that case, we can get very smooth transition between the two materials. Now let's see if it's good like this. So maybe I will increase the value at the last frame. So because we need to get 1 at the top. So now we can see we have a bit of yellow. So we need to increase just a little bit the spread value. So let's put 1.5.
Imagine having access to over 40 hours of exclusive Houdini tutorials. And that library keeps growing every month with brand new content. On Arta Labs, you'll find in-depth Houdini tutorials covering motion design, simulations, product visualization, and more. Plus, you get access to all project files so you can follow along step by step. And right now, we're offering an extra 20% off the annual membership, on top of the 10% discount already included when compared to the monthly plan. This exclusive deal is available for the first 30 people, so don't miss out. Click the link below, your 20% discount is applied automatically. Secure your spot before it's gone.
So here with the mob spread fall off for now is a bit linear, but you have the option to get some noise into the fall off. So let's go into the noise tab here and let's apply some noise. And here you can see you can change the noise type. So basically I like to use a simplex one. And maybe I can increase the subdivide here. So maybe let's put at 2. So we can get a bit more detail into our mob spread fall off. And here you can play with different value into the noise. So you can play with the amplitude to get more or less amplitude, the frequency, the roughness, and so on. So in my case, I will keep on simplex for the noise type. And here on the Animate tab, we have added 2 keyframes for the spread. So 1 keyframe here and 1 keyframe here. And by default, Houdini will put the keyframe on the Bezier curve. So you can go into the animation editor here. You can press H to center the curve, and you can select the both keyframe and put them into linear. So I think it's a bit better for this specific type of animations. So now we can use this mobs fall off attribute to create a material transition between the white color here and the blue color here. But you can also use this mobs fall off attribute to create a blend between 2 different shapes. So let's do that to create a more interesting scenes. So here we will copy everything from the curve to the normal here. So let's Alt and left click here. And let's visualize this second shape. Now we can go back into the front view with space 3. Now we can select our curve here, and maybe let's define another profile for the curve. So you can select this icon, and here with the middle click you can move your points. So let's change the shape of this second vase. So now let's say we have this shape, and let's use the mops fall off attribute to create a blend between these two shapes. So to do that, let's add a point wrangles. Let's plug the first geometry into the first input, and let's plug the second geometry into the second input of the point wrangles. And here let's start by getting the point position of the first geometry. So to do that, let's create a variable vector, maybe origin points, which is equal to the point functions of the first input, which is 0 for the points attributes, and for all the points, so at ptnum. And let's do absolutely the same for the second input, for the second geometry. So let's copy that. Let's paste that into the second line, and let's rename this something like new positions. So here is the second input, which is 1, the point attribute for all the points here. So now let's create a ramp to create a transition between the two shapes. So let's add a float ramp. And let's create a channel ramp. And you can give a name to your ramp, so you can rename it something like transitions. And you can use the attribute you want to use for the ramp. And in my case, I will use the attribute mops fall off. So at mops fall off. And here you can use the lerp function to blend these two shapes based on the ramp. So let's add at p for the points, which is equal to, and here let's use the lerp function to blend between the two shapes. And let's blend between the origin positions, the new positions with this ramp parameter. And now let's see the results of our transition. So here you can select your ramp. Maybe you can select these two icons and you can put them into monotone cubic. And here you can see we have used these mops fall off to blend the two shapes. So you can blend between materials, and at the same time you can blend between two shapes. So I think it's a bit more interesting to do that for this specific scenes. So here let's add a normal node just after our transitions. And here, if you want, you can also add a bit of displacement on the transition of the shape here. So to do that, we can maybe add a mops remap fall off just after the first fall off here. So let's add a mops remap fall off here. And we will use as an input the mops fall off attribute, and we will use as an output the mops fall off remap attribute. So in that case, we have two mops fall off attributes. The first one, which is this one, and the second one is a mops fall off remap, which is a remapped attribute. So here you can put maybe a keyframe at something like 0.35. Let's add another one here into the ramp. So let's put the last one at 0, and this one at the value 1, and let's put the position at something like 65. So now you can select all the points here, and you can put them like before into monotone cubic to get this type of curve. And now we can use that into a points VOP to deform our geometry and to displace the geometry based on the transition here. So you can use points VOP. And here you can dive inside, and you can add a bind to import some attribute into the point VOP. And we want to use the mops fall off remap attributes. So let's plug that into a ramp parameter. And you can multiply that with another parameter to create more or less displacements. So let's put that one into the first input of the multiply. And let's add a parameter here. And let's put the parameter on the second input of the multiply, and let's put the default value at 1. And here you can simply add the node displace along normals. And you can put the position into position, you can put the output into positions here. And here you can put that into the amount of the displacement, and you can put the normals into the normal here. And here for the ramp, you can select the ramp node, and instead of RGB, you can select the spline ramp. So now you can go back into the sub level here, and you can go with your ramp, and you can select the deformation you want. And here you can decrease the parameter to something like 0.02. And here you can play with the value you want for the displacement. And you can select the 2 points here, and you can put them into monotone cubic like before to get this type of curve. So now let's add a color node to see the result of our material transition. So let's plug that into the color node. And here you can use into color type the ramp from attributes. And our attribute is the first mops fall off. So this one. So let's add the mops fall off attribute here. And now we can see we have a transition from white to black, and we can use that for a material transition later. So now let's add just a little bit of motion to our transition, because for now I think it's a bit boring like this. So let's add a nulls. Let's specify this is the input for our chop network. So let's add maybe chop to chop. Now let's add a channel node. And here you can use a chop network to create our chop effect on these deformations. So here you can dive into the chop net. And here let's start by importing our geometry into the chop networks. So here into the SOP we can select the null we have called toChop. So here we can change the method from static to animated, and here we will use a spring, but you can use different effects if you want. So in my case for the spring I use the value of 100, for the mass I put 2, and for the damping constant I put 3. So here let's add a null to specify this is the end of our chop. So let's rename it something like end chop. So now you can go back into the SOP here, and here with the channel node you can select your out chop of the chop net here. So let's select it with this icon, and into the chop net you can select the end chop, and here you can put it into animated like before. So now we can see the result of our chop. So it will add an extra motion to our transitions. But of course you can play with different settings with the spring here if you want to get different results. So here for now we don't have any thickness to our geometry, so let's add the poly extrude node. And here you can extrude just a little bit, so maybe you can put the distance at 0.02, something like this. And you can click on output back to create some thickness to our geometry. So then you can use another subdivide node. And here you can put the value at 1 or 2 if you want to get more detail, but I think at 1 it's enough like this. So now let's add a file cache. And you can rename it as you want. So in my case I will put maybe a transition tuts. And here you can put it into explicit. So in my case I like to put in cache folder and $OS folder, which is the name of the node for $OS. And here you can simply click on save to disk, and the cache will be very, very fast. So now let's add a null after this file cache. And let's specify this is the end of our scenes. So maybe you can rename it something like out vase. And here you can simply Control C. And now you can add another geometry node here. You can disable that one. And here you can use an object merge. And you can paste it into the object one. So now we have our object into this new geometry container. So now let's add a material node to assign material to this geometry. And let's add a null to specify this is the end of our scene. So let's rename it render. And here you can select the geometry node here, and you can maybe decrease the scale of the object. So maybe you can put 0.5 or maybe 0.3. to get something like this. So now let's add a camera to our scenes. So I will select my camera, I will put it here. And now let's add a light, so RS light tone. And now let's create some material. So let's add the material network, and here you can dive inside and you can add a first material. So let's type RS material builder. And here you can rename it vase, and you can dive inside, and from here you have a base material link to the output, and here you can use the material blender, and you can plug this first material into the first input of the material blender, and you can put that one into the output, and here you can use another standard material here, and you can plug it into the layer 1 layer color, and here you can use the RS points attributes. And here by default, it will select the CD attribute. So basically we will use the CD we have added with the color node from white to black, and we use this color to create a mask between two materials. But you can use every attribute you want to create the mask between the two materials, but in my case I will use the CD attribute. So let's plug the CD attribute into the layer 1 blend color. So now we have our two material, and we have the mask link into the output. So let's put that one in maybe green, and let's put the other one maybe in blue. just to see the results of our material transitions. So now let's go back into the object levels, into the vase here, and into the material. Let's add the material to assign to this geometry. So here I will select my material here. Let's click on accept. And now let's go back into Redshift render view and let's see the results of our mask. So now we can see we have a transition between our two materials. So we have the green and we have the blue. And of course you can go back into the material network here, and with the vase here you can of course plug different textures into your materials. So for now it's very basic material, but you can use PBR texture to plug into each of these materials to get a transition between two different materials. So here for example I can choose that one and put the transmission at 1. And now we can see we have something very different, and we can put the roughness at 0.01. So now we have a transition between a simple green material and a glass material. So you can make every material transition you want with these techniques. That's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and check artivoxr.com to get premium 3D resources. You can access to this project file with our Artifiles membership. See you in the next one. Bye.